A little bit about your relationship with her, who's also was raised in Boyle Heights. Of course, Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass, which the brass, mariachi brass of the Tijuana Brass didn't come from Boyle Heights, but came from the influence of Tijuana mariachis in the bullfight. I wondered if you could talk a little bit about those days of late 50s, early 60s, songwriting with him, the early days of the Tijuana Brass, and that period.
Herb actually went to Fairfax High School.
Was he born here?
No, he wasn't born here, but his family lived here until he was about 12, and then they moved to the west side. Herbie was, this sort of involves, my wife's in the audience, she's heard this story about it, but I'll tell it again. Herbie's girlfriend was going to LA City College. I didn't know Herbie, and I didn't know that it was his girlfriend. So I became friendly with this girl, started dating this girl while Herb was in the Army. And when Herb, and it's funny because Herb got out of the Army, and I sort of backed off, and Herbie went back with his girlfriend. And I was dating her girlfriend at that point. And they introduced Herbie and I. And Herb at that time was still a trumpet player, a beginning trumpet player. He had a bar mitzvah band, he had a little group, he played weddings, he played bar mitzvahs. And I had started writing poetry and song lyrics while I was still in, I guess I started in junior high school, but I continued in high school. And mostly I thought I was going to be a journalist. I took mostly journalism classes. But, so when Herbie and I met, and the fact that he played music and I wrote lyrics, it seemed like natural that we would try some songs. We cut some, how deep do you want me to get? Do you want me to keep going with this?
Selfishly, I do, but I
At that particular time, you couldn't get in to see anybody at the three majors, Capitol Records, Columbia Records, and RCA Victor Records. So you had to find these little storefronts where independent record companies at that time, 56 or 50, were just starting to spring up along Vine Street. So we cut 4 demos with Herbie singing, and we took them to a small record company called Keen Records at that time. And their only artist was Sam Cooke. And we became very friendly with Sam. I lived with Sam for quite a while. And that was sort of the real beginning of songwriting, because the person that signed us to the company was a man by the name of Bumps Blackwell, who was a teacher. And he, everything that we hadn't learned about pop music or rock music, he wanted to teach us and did. And then Sam, who grew up and performed mostly in the gospel area, he sort of taught me, I didn't have a musical background. I had some music, but I never played it. I played trumpet for a while until my nose started to bleed so bad. And I learned from him how to communicate with musicians, even though I wasn't a musician, so that I could communicate within a recording situation. And we stayed, Herbie and I, we had our first hits were with Sam and Jan and Dean, surf group from West LA. And we stayed together for about 4 or 5 years. And then Herb always wanted to be an artist, and I wanted the other part of it, the backstage part of it. So we decided to go our separate ways, and at that point, he ran into a man by the name of, I believe his name was Salt Glass, which is a strange mariachi name, but or even Glazer, which is even stranger. He wrote a song that later turned out to be Lonely Bull. And Herb and I, during the time we were together, we used to go to Tijuana all the time to the bullfights. And he just loved that Martin mariachi song, and put it together with this song that became The Lonely Bull. And that's how that record company really started, A&M Records.
Amazing. A&M Records begins the Tijuana Bullfight. A&M Records begins in the Tijuana Bullfight. There it is. And in my applaud that. In my research on Herb Alpert over the years, there's also I found that a lot of Mexicans in Tijuana thought that Herb was Mexican, and many Mexicanos in Los Angeles.
I still think I am.
Yeah. No? You know yeah. Atlet. That's right. If you go back and look at the history, there's a wonderful timeline actually online that Boyle Heights project. I think the project began at the Japanese American National Museum a few years ago now. There's an incredible timeline of the history of Boyle Heights that's online. And I was looking over it in advance of today's conversation, and what was so incredible is almost every third date in the timeline, beginning from the kind of very, very beginning of Boyle Heights in 1858, when it was, before it was actually officially founded, but when the Irish immigrant Andrew Boyle first sets up shop here in 1858, every two kind of second or third date is a protest. Every series of dates will have the arrival of a dissenting group. Russians who dissented from the Russian Orthodox Church in 1904, the Molokans who come to Boyle Heights as a rebel, resistant, dissenting group. Yiddish Workmen's Circle sets up in 1908. The Communist Party has always had a healthy foothold in Boyle Heights. Mexican immigrants who left Mexico during the Mexican Revolution in 1910. The International Institute of Los Angeles was in Boyle Heights in 1914 with the goal of assisting foreign communities. And on throughout, up through the blowouts and student walkouts, the Chicano student walkouts of 1968, the moratorium of 1970, protests against the plan to build a prison in Boyle Heights in the 1980s, protests against not one, not two, but three, but 4 or 5 freeways that cut through Boyle Heights. That this is a neighborhood where protest has always been a central part of what it means to be here. And I'm wondering, Martha, could you talk a little bit about how you see that history, but more importantly, how in your work and the work with your band that you've carved out your own space for it, but are very conscious of the tradition that you're working within?
Well, I was initiated, I've been a part of the music, world, and as far as from the standpoint of Mexican immigrant communities, right, for many years before I met Quetzal Flores, who was looking for a singer for his band. The previous singer had left, and the band started in 1992. In response to the 1992 Rodney King riots, right? Quetzal felt that his project, music project, was really sort of in response to this tension, racial tension of the times, and the violence that was being inflicted on African American communities and Korean communities in the area, and just the turmoil and police brutality that we still see today. But he really wanted to have this new experience in Chicano music. Right, so much of it had been, as far as people would talk about, was really about Chicano music in terms of tierra or war, for example. These very prominent bands, El Chicano and other sounds, very important music soundtrack to the community here. But he really felt like he wanted to sort of explore new sounds and new ideas. And so I had a friend, a mutual friend. He was actually roading for a very important musician also from this area. His name is Marcos Loya. He's a guitarist and a very prominent guitarist. And so we met. He had my number. He called me. And anyway, I ended up marrying this guy. I was starting to explore it. I don't know how that happened, but music. So anyhow, so I started playing with this band, but in the course of playing with the band, I think that band was really rooted in the social movement of the time. In 1994, you had January 1st, indigenous communities in Chiapas, Mexico, an uprising, right, where they were really not happy with the national, NAFTA, which is North American Free Trade Agreement. And so they had organized years before this, the year it was supposed to really officially take place, which was January 1st, 1994, the indigenous rebels in the mountains of Chiapas manifested, and it was heard around the world. It was a very internet-based as well as media-based, but heavy internet, where you could get the information of what their declarations were, what they were demanding from their government, but also really reaching out to other communities, aggrieved communities around the world, to have these dialogues. Well, they have these dialogues with communities still, but Chicanos in East Los Angeles really reached out to them as well, and we began this transnational dialogue with these Mayan communities in Chiapas. So their philosophy, their way of looking at their communities rather than from a deficit perspective and more from an asset-based perspective, sort of like what we did now a little while ago. We walked the community and talked about all the wonderful things that happened before, but also the things that continue to happen now, right, which are really important, where people are still thriving in their own ways and finding these moments of resistance and still creating families and taking care of each other very much the same ways. Well, that's how we started looking at our communities. And there was no better place to build community than around music, right? And music practice and music as dialectic. So after years of transnational dialogue with these communities, we began to look at music not just as a way as a vehicle to sort of spread our message or our ideas, right? But also as a dialectic tool, right? So to think about music not just as let's start a band and say really important political things, but also doing that because I think that's really important, and that's always something that you can archive and document, and in the songs you get to say a lot. But also thinking of music as a way to really build dialogue with people, to dialogue through music practice. We've been doing that for many years now through the fandango practice, as far as an extension of Quetzal, the band, which is the band I'm in, but also through, you've had an experience here, the MLK sing-alongs, right? That was a perfect example of how music, I think, is also really important for us to engage in music practice as community in this way, right? So these things, I think, are the ways in which, as a band, we always our music and our content has always been about identity and community building and Chicano, Mexicano community empowerment and female Chicano feminist empowerment as well. But I think most importantly, our band has been really committed to finding other ways of engaging communities, not just in terms of our performances and our CDs, and of which I have some here today, by the way. But besides that, it's as a way of really engaging communities through music practice. And so we've done that in various forms, and we're very proud of that trajectory and body of work as well.
Absolutely. What happens in your classrooms now in terms of how these kids are thinking about music's connection to culture and identity?
Well, one of the ways that I've overcome the lack of resources is to be certified as a little kids rock instructor, which is an irony as I have a doctorate in orchestral conducting. And I don't play the guitar. But I thought, how am I going to reach these kids? And you reach kids who are in a completely segregated city, such as LA, where if I take them off campus, they say, "Miss, there are so many white people here." They say that. And that is they have the same experience leaving Boyle Heights that I had coming to Boyle Heights, which is very enriching for me to have that experience of being a minority. I've absolutely embraced it and used it for my own growth, and have learned that music, building on what you had said, Martha, building on what Martha had said about the music really bringing together in that MLK Day here was so special for that we had a real mix of peoples here with the Japanese and African American, and everybody was all here together. Was really what I see as a picture of the future, because the kids that I teach right now, they don't have that. And so becoming a little kids rock teacher allowed me to, coming to them first with Mozart and Beethoven like I did, and I was like, I'm going to bring this to them because the other teachers at Roosevelt aren't based in the classical genre, and I am, and I'm going to bring this to them. They brought me far more than I brought them. And they brought me, like I said, American music is what they're listening to. And to teach them that and to teach it to them through their eyes, through their vision of, hey, did you guys know that Los Lobos is from this, neighborhood? Let's listen to that and let's learn it. How did they put these chords together? Oh, these chords are common to all rock and roll. And gee, Elvis was a minority when he went and studied the blues, and then he brought the black art of the blues into the mainstream, and that was the birth of rock and roll. Yeah, gee, that's really happened right here in Boyle Heights through such and such and such. And, they're very based in rap, the kids. I don't know if you know that, but it's really, really hard to teach what I call real music to people who only listen to rap. I'm telling you, if anybody wants to try it, let me know how it goes, because it's really hard. But I use what they know to try to reach through lyrics, through storytelling, through, whatever it is. And oh, did you know that Tupac Shakur actually does use chord changes in his rap? And he builds tension through the use of the dominant during the chorus, and there is a chorus and da-da-da. And so having to draw from any source that I possibly could has been so challenging, but really, really rewarding. And I think I have just completely come down off my ivory tower high horse and said, you know what, this needs to be in the schools, because the kids can play it, it's accessible. And then like our orchestra kids, like Boyle Heights Community Orchestra, they're just let us play. And we'll play Beethoven, and we'll play Ode to Joy, and we'll play Pachelbel Canon, and we'll play, some Elvis or whatever it is that we put in front of them, because it's all music. And that's the way to bring diversity to a neighborhood like this.
Plenty of people who claim that Elvis actually was if you look at early Elvis, the way he pomaded his hair and wore his pants, when he was kind of doing the zoot suit thing. There's lots of Chicano claiming of early Elvis style. Just saying. Hence lose the confusions that you get with it. Martha, do you want to join in on that?
Well, I just want to say that mixture, that desire to, the music that you come in with into schools in terms of popular, what you hear in the sonic, as you're driving by. If you drive with your windows down Cesar Chavez, you're going to hear all of these influences, right? They're more contemporary, obviously, but you will hear the rancheras, you will hear the narco corridos, the corridos, the old school mariachis, the guys walking down the street going in and out of different, with the accordions, and right, you're going to hear all that. And I think that, and then I personally had a very wonderful teacher. Her name was Helen Stringos, and she was this Greek woman, like I mentioned earlier. She taught us all about some Western music and, Jewish carols and, all of these other things that came together. And that's a very, from my perspective and my years here, very East LA experience, right? Where you have all these Latin American influences, but predominantly Mexicano. You go into the school, you learn more Western stuff, and that was all music that was, and I'm glad to hear that you don't think it's something that you're working it in, because that is music. And Tupac was also doing music, and he knew exactly what he was doing as he would, as he rapped to this section. And he was a poet, he was a philosopher, and they hear that because it speaks to their reality, right? And so it's great to hear that you're combining all those things, and that it's important that you're not like devaluing it and saying that's bad stuff, which is, it's just awesome. It's
so
And you can
awesome.
also come here to the Shul and look right above where we're sitting, and I think that's where Jay-Z got the Rock Nation.
Exactly, you know?
I think it's there. Lou.
As far as the rap, it's more generational than it's anything. It's not cultural at all.
Right.
It spreads across every household. I have 7 boys, and they are entering the music business in various stages. And one of the next to the oldest, when he was 12, I guess, is when rap started to hit. And the hardest thing to explain to him was that you could do music with musicians, because all they heard was a track, and they heard someone rapping on it, and they thought that was the end of it. Today, he's a very well-accomplished musician. That there's a breakthrough, and I think in rap, there are artists that have taken it to another level, so that there's a lot of music involved with it.
Yeah, which is great.
Kanye West, Jay-Z,
Yeah.
those type of artists.
And to your point, Lou, I think a lot of that idea of that there's instruments that you can play with each other, but also that you can play instruments in the same room together, not just recording them in one city and tracking them in another, is that Boyle Heights has always been this neighborhood where those kinds of encounters have happened, yes, on the streets and in informal settings, but also because of spaces like this. But there have been so many venues, both commercial venues and community venues, and some that mixed, that I just wanted to have us pay some tribute to, because it's been, you have to have space to bring people together. Places like, Angeles Hall, for example, Self-Help Graphics, Mariachi Plaza, which is really interesting, kind of a indoor-outdoor space, commercial and community. The Paramount Ballroom, I want to recognize Ruben Guevara again, who I hope will share some stories with us in the Q&A, but Ruben's been doing amazing work with young kids in the legendary Paramount Ballroom and its renovation, still working on the Hall of Fame, the East LA Musical Hall of Fame, but using the Paramount Ballroom's rich musical history as a way to educate young people today in music. The Phillips Music Company, I know we've got some Phillips Music Company familia in the house, that was here from the 1930s through the 1980s on Cesar Chavez as a music store, a record store, and a community hub. Places where in the 1940s, Don Tosti and Paul Lopez and Chico Sesma would come into the back room and rehearse in the back. One of my favorite, of the many, many favorite Phillips Music Company stories was when Bill Phillips, who owned the store, was doing a lot of session work for Hollywood Films, was asked, I think it was by Paramount, if he could come up with, he wanted, the studio wanted Jewish music, that's all it said, it was Jewish music for a scene in a film. And if he had any that he could help get done for the film, and he didn't, but he realized he had all these Jewish records in the store, but he didn't have any Jewish musicians who could play it, so he asked all of the local Mexican-American musicians who were in the store every day, who were great jazz musicians and classical players, if they would record the Jewish music for the film. So some of Hollywood's greatest Jewish music was played in Boyle Heights by Mexican-American musicians. Places